Today, it is officially the law of the land, are now formally designated as foreign terrorist organization.
In early 2025, Washington branded Mexico's most powerful cartels as foreign terrorists.
In the fight against drug cartels has become a reality. President Trump officially designating them as foreign terrorist organizations.
Overnight, billion-dollar empires that once felt untouchable suddenly found themselves cornered and hunted in ways they had never faced before. But the true danger wasn't the label itself. It was the panic it triggered. Warlords lashed out in ways that blurred the line between organized crime and open war. This is the terrifying story of what happened after the U.S. declared cartels terrorists. The day cartels were declared terrorists.
So they are now designated as terrorist organizations, foreign. Mexico probably doesn't want that.
On February 20th, 2025, Washington flipped a switch it had never dared to touch before. The State Department stepped in front of cameras and declared that some of the most violent cartels in the Americas were no longer just drug syndicates. They were now legally branded as foreign terrorist organizations. At the same time, Treasury placed them on the list of specially designated global terrorists, a move usually reserved for groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Overnight, the cartels were dragged out of the narco-crime category and shoved into the same box as global terror networks.
The drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, including Tren de Aragua and MS-13.
8 names appeared: Tren de Aragua, Mara Salvatrucha, better known as MS-13, the Cartel de Sinaloa, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the Northeastern Cartel, La Nueva Familia Michoacana, the Gulf Cartel, and Carteles Unidos. These weren't just names on paper. This was a legal earthquake that rewired how the U.S. could hunt them and anyone who dared to help them.
600 people linked to the Sinaloa drug cartel have been arrested. The DEA is looking for you in the U.S.
The spark came a month earlier. On January 20th, President Biden signed a new executive order. It told every U.S. agency to treat certain cartels just like foreign terror groups. That single order plugged them into 2 powerful legal systems at once. The first was the FTO designation under Section 219 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. The second was the SDGT process under sanctions law through the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and Executive Order 13224. Put simply, the first switch made it a federal crime to give them any material support, while the second switch froze anything they touched in the U.S. financial system. If a cartel dollar showed up in a U.S. bank, it could be blocked on the spot. If a company tried to sell them parts or equipment, that company could face prosecution. For cartels, it was like a trap door opening beneath their money and their partners.
And to try to get them on drugs or some other thing. You see what I mean? I can get them out of the country very rapidly, quickly.
So why did this material support language matter so much? Because the law tied to it has sharp teeth. Under it, you can't knowingly provide money, goods, training, services, personnel, or technology to a designated terrorist group. The base punishment runs up to 20 years in federal prison. And if anyone dies because of that support, it can go up to life. The law doesn't stop at money couriers or gun smugglers. It stretches into conspiracies and attempts, and it crosses borders.
And when there is a national security threat, to use force in a way that you would not be permitted to do.
That means even if someone is operating outside U.S. territory, if their actions connect back to that material support, the Justice Department can drag them into a U.S. courtroom. This was the lever that transformed cartel cases from narcotics charges into terrorism indictments. It was designed to reach the bankers, the shell company operators, the recruiters, even the parts suppliers who thought they were insulated by distance or by paperwork. Suddenly, they were inside the blast radius, and Washington wasted no time showing it wasn't bluffing.
They're too dangerous, put in jails, standing trial in this country, because we don't want them to come back ever.
On May 16th, Barely 3 months after the announcement, prosecutors in El Paso, Texas, unsealed a case. It was the very first indictment to charge a Mexican national with material support to one of the newly branded terrorist groups, CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The name on the document was Maria del Rosario Navarro Sanchez. She wasn't just accused of moving drugs. Prosecutors said she handled grenades, worked across alien smuggling, bulk cash runs, firearms trafficking, and acted as a jack of all trades for the cartel. In the old system, those jobs might have been sliced into separate indictments, maybe labeled as drug conspiracy or illegal export. Now, they were all stitched together under a single title: support to a terrorist organization. The case became proof that the new law wasn't just for headlines. It was ammunition prosecutors were ready to fire. But the crackdown didn't stop with criminal indictments. On March 18th, the Treasury Department's sanctions arm, OFAC, sent shockwaves through the financial world. It blasted out a public alert to banks, brokers, insurers, and businesses worldwide. The notice spelled out the 8 groups, warned that their property was frozen in the U.S., and reminded everyone that Americans and foreign firms alike could face penalties if they helped them or tried to dodge the restrictions. One line in particular turned heads. Foreign financial institutions risked losing access to U.S. correspondent accounts if they knowingly serviced those cartels. To put that into plain language, a foreign bank could lose its access to the U.S. dollar system. For a global bank, that's like being cut off from oxygen. It meant compliance officers in Frankfurt, Hong Kong, or Sao Paulo were suddenly scrubbing their records for even a whiff of Sinaloa or CJNG. Not everyone welcomed the move. Across the border, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum stood at her daily morning press conference on February 20th and drew a line in the sand. Yes, she said, Mexico would keep working with Washington, but cooperation would mean coordination, never subordination. She vowed to push a constitutional reform to protect national sovereignty and to strengthen penalties on arms trafficking. And she repeated a warning: no foreign military boots would touch Mexican soil.
We can share information, but we will never accept the presence of the U.S. Army in our territory.
By August, when rumors swirled about secret U.S. directives, she doubled down. There will be no invasion of Mexico. For her, Washington's new terror labels were just ink on U.S. legal documents. But Mexico's red line was territorial. No U.S. troops, no exceptions. Canada, meanwhile, quietly fell into step with Washington. On the very same day, February 20th, Ottawa announced it was adding 7 of the same groups to its criminal code list of terrorist entities.
The Government of Canada is listing 7 transnational criminal organizations as terrorist entities under Canada's criminal code.
The Canadian government named Sinaloa, CJNG, the Gulf Cartel, La Nueva Familia Michoacana, Carteles Unidos, MS-13, and Tren de Aragua. The consequences were the same as in the U.S. Asset freezes, property seizures, and criminal penalties for anyone offering support. It's rare for 2 North American governments to move in perfect unison on terror designations.
To working closely with our United States partners to do all we can to keep Canada safe.
This time they did, creating a continental front. Inside the U.S., the designation tightened in other ways. The State Department controls the FTO label, while Treasury's OFAC office maintains the sanctions lists that banks scan against every day. That meant the February announcement wasn't just about courtroom indictments. It changed how wire rooms, payment processors, and trade desks screened transactions. When OFAC updated its lists, compliance officers around the world had to adapt. Suddenly, names tied to those cartels would trigger frozen accounts, blocked transfers, and internal investigations. For ordinary Americans, this might sound abstract, But in the corporate world, those alerts can halt multi-million-dollar transactions in seconds. By August, the ripple effects reached ordinary travelers. The State Department quietly updated its Mexico travel page, adding terrorism to the nationwide advisory. For the first time, official U.S. guidance told Americans to exercise increased caution in Mexico due to terrorism, crime, and kidnapping.
The U.S. State Department is recommending Americans reconsider travel to one of the most popular spots for so many Arizonans. We're talking about Rocky Point.
February 20th wasn't a stunt. It was a pivot. And for cartel bosses, the label itself wasn't the real danger. What terrified them was what came next: the hunt for their money, their networks, and their command structure. Washington had flipped the terror switch. The next move was to choke the flow of cash and tear apart the nodes of power. Cartel warlords, hunted as terrorists. Within weeks of the United States branding cartels as terrorist organizations, Washington started moving on actual people and the financial veins that kept them alive. The world didn't just hear a label. It saw cartel leaders with bounties on their heads, families cut off from their luxury businesses, and U.S. prosecutors reaching deeper than ever before. And this was only the beginning.
Drug kingpin Ishmael Zambada Garcia, also known as El Mayo.
Let's start in Michoacán, the state where avocado groves and lime orchards share ground with the most entrenched cartels. Here, a coalition calls itself Carteles Unidos, or United Cartels. On August 14, 2025, prosecutors in Washington, D.C. and eastern Tennessee dropped indictments on 5 senior figures. The names read like a roll call of Michoacán's warlords: Juan José Farias Alvarez, known as El Abuelo; Alfonso Fernández Magallón, nicknamed Poncho;
Bermudez, known by the nickname El Abuelo, faces charges of criminal association, extortion, and kidnapping.
Luis Enrique Barragán Chávez, also called Vicho, or R5; Edgar Valeriano Orozco Cabadas, El Camoni; and Nicolas Sierra Santana, El Gordo. The charging papers painted a picture of a sprawling drug highway. Not just trickles of meth, fentanyl, and cocaine, but a steady surge feeding American cities like Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Kansas City, Sacramento, Los Angeles, Denver, and Chicago. These weren't one-off shipments. Prosecutors described a conveyor belt big enough to keep multiple distribution hubs supplied at the same time. But indictments were just the stick. On that same day, Washington brought out the carrot, a very sharp one. The State Department announced up to $26 million in rewards, $10 million for tips on El Abuelo, and $5 million each for Fernández Magallón, Barragán Chávez, Orozco Cabadas, and Sierra Santana.
Calling it the result of coordinated intelligence efforts. Bermudez, known by the nickname El Abuelo.
These payouts were open invitations for rivals, insiders, or even nervous lieutenants to turn phone calls into fortune. Every safe house and secret passport suddenly had a dollar figure attached. Even if these bosses never crossed a border again, their inner circles knew that loyalty could now be priced. The pressure didn't stop at people, it bled into money. On August 14th, OFAC moved in tandem with the indictments. United Cartels as an organization, plus 4 of its leaders, including El Abuelo, were branded under terror and narcotics authorities. OFAC also added 3 figures from Los Viagras, a rival Michoacán faction. The Treasury notice spelled out why. These cartels were squeezing farmers with extortion rackets, recruiting ex-soldiers from abroad, and stretching across the border to pull dollars out of U.S. wallets while draining pesos from Mexican agriculture. When OFAC writes your name, it isn't just ink, it's exile from the financial system. U.S. assets are frozen. American banks block any transaction with your name, and foreign banks get warned. Help them, and you risk losing access to U.S. dollar clearing. In simple terms, if your lawyer tries to buy a property, if your company tries to wire payroll, if your supplier tries to process an invoice, everything freezes. And when your shell firms can't move money, your cartel can't pay its army. Shift the map north and you hit Sinaloa. By June 9th, 2025, Treasury targeted Los Chapitos, the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
El Chapo, and the moment he learned where authorities were taking him, that was the moment he was actually brought here to the U.S. to face justice.
The move included $10 million reward offers, each for Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar and Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, two fugitives still running their father's old empire. But the sanctions didn't stop with their names. Treasury exposed an entire laundering hub in Mazatlan, naming plaza boss Victor Manuel Barraza Pablos, financier Jose Raul Nunez Rios, and 10 businesses in their orbit. The list wasn't vague. It spelled out companies like Beach Y Marina, C Wa Beach Club, Carpe Diem Spa, and Comercializadora Copado. These weren't dusty fronts. They were glitzy resorts, clubs, and shops that anchored the Chapitos' image of power. Cutting off those businesses was more than a headline. It froze the payrolls of gatekeepers, drivers, cooks, and cleaners who made the city function for the Guzman sons. Suddenly, Mazatlan's nightlife wasn't just about music and beaches, it was a financial choke point. Then came a move that rocked Baja California politics. On September 18, 2025, Treasury hit Los Mayos, the Sinaloa faction tied to Ismael El Mayo Zambada. It blacklisted 5 individuals and 15 companies linked to Rosarito Beach operations.
El Mayo will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
But one name overshadowed all the others: Hilda Araceli Brown Figueredo, a sitting Mexican federal lawmaker, a member of the ruling party, and a former mayor of Playas de Rosarito. For Washington to sanction a sitting legislator is extraordinary. But OFAC treated it like any other listing: passport numbers, national ID numbers, and a flat declaration blocked. Alongside her, the sheet listed cartel-linked names like Jesus Gonzalez Lomeli and companies such as Bombay Beach Club, Coco Beach Bar, Mariscos El Caiman, hotel developers, and transport firms. When those names hit the sanctions list, every U.S. bank flagged them, and even non-U.S. banks raced to close accounts. For Rosarito, a tourist town famous for nightlife, this wasn't about music festivals, it was about frozen wires, suddenly couldn't make payroll. 2 days earlier, Washington went after Los Mayos enforcers. On September 16th, it announced a $5 million reward for Juan Jose El Russo, Ponce Felix, the head of Los Russos, a faction operating along critical border corridors. Washington didn't just name him, it revealed he was allegedly spending over $1 million per month in bribes to keep his network safe. That number alone told the story. Before a single shipment moved, Los Mayos had to pour $1 million into corrupt payments. That kind of cost makes financial pressure deadly. When accounts freeze and money stalls, those bribe lines collapse, and corruption becomes a lot harder to buy. But the crackdown wasn't only about narcos. It was also about their side hustles, the business ventures that looked legitimate until you scratched the surface.
Cartel, we're going to attack them in the 43 countries they have operations in. We are attacking them worldwide.
On August 13th, 2025, the U.S. Treasury went after a very different kind of cartel hustle: timeshare fraud in Puerto Vallarta. 4 people and 13 companies were sanctioned for running a call center scam tied to CJNG. The trick was simple but devastating. English-speaking callers pretended to be brokers or lawyers. They promised vacation homeowners they could resell or re-rent their timeshares if the owners first paid taxes or fees. Many victims wired money again and again, but the promised payouts never arrived. The scale was shocking.
They're being recruited and used for purchasing and transporting cartel-related goods.
In the 6 months after a FinCEN alert, banks filed more than 250 suspicious activity reports. Those reports flagged over 1,300 transactions, adding up to $23.1 million. FBI numbers showed the human cost. About 6,000 U.S. victims lost nearly $300 million between 2019 and 2023. In 2024 alone, the damage was more than $50 million. These weren't small cons. They were people's life savings, their retirement cushions, funneled straight into cartel accounts. Treasury named the players. 3 CJNG enforcers, Julio Cesar Montero Pinzon, Carlos Andres Rivera Varela, and Francisco Javier Gudiño Haro, were called out, along with Puerto Vallarta businessman Michael Ibarra Diaz Jr. 13 of his companies were added to the blacklist, from Acali Realtors and Sunmex Travel to Fishing R Us and Santa Maria Cruise. Once those names hit OFAC's list, the effect was immediate. Banks and payment processors froze the accounts. Vendors walked away. The call centers could keep dialing. The oil business wasn't safe either. On May 1st, 2025, OFAC sanctioned 3 Mexican nationals and 2 companies for running a CJNG fuel theft and crude oil smuggling network worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Smuggling about $300 million in illegal oil from Mexico, involving nearly 2,900 shipments.
The companies, Servicios Logísticos Ambientales in Reynosa and Grupo Jala Logística in Rio Bravo, were accused of hauling stolen Pemex crude across the border, disguising it as waste oil, and then selling it into U.S. and global markets. FinCEN, Treasury's financial intelligence unit, even released diagrams showing exactly how it worked. Crude was siphoned from Pemex and stored in tanks inside cartel territory. From there, it was relabeled as scrap oil and trucked north. Once it crossed the border, the shipments were staged in U.S. storage yards before being sold to complicit importers.
Payments for the oil were sent to entities in Mexico under the control of criminal organizations, aka Mexican drug cartels.
On paper, the cargo looked harmless, just waste oil. In reality, it was one of CJNG's most reliable money machines, steady in a way drug loads never were. There's a reason prosecutors could move on all these different targets. Once a cartel is listed as a terrorist group, you don't have to prove drug trafficking. And from here, the danger only escalated. Because once the money ran thin, cartel bosses started to panic, fighting harder and bloodier to defend their turf. The chaos that followed the declaration. When Washington slapped the terrorist tag on Mexico's cartels, the bloodshed didn't ease up. It got nastier, and the proof came fast. On May 28, 2025, along a dusty road outside Los Reyes in Michoacán, Mexican troops hit a nightmare they'd been warned about. An armored vehicle from the National Guard's elite Immediate Reaction Special Force, known as FERRI, rolled straight over a buried mine.
Join them. Militarization of cartels, expansion of controls over municipalities and police.
The blast tossed steel like scrap and left bodies shattered. By nightfall, 8 soldiers were dead. It was the single worst death toll Mexican forces had ever suffered from a landmine-style device. Officials had long said homemade mines were spreading across that corridor. Since 2021, they had already defused more than 600. But this attack showed just how deadly one could be when it slipped through. And these weren't battlefields far from the public.
We need the help of everybody here. This is what they're putting in the ground. And they think it hurts us.
The mines crept into farm lanes and canyon tracks, the same paths lime pickers, teachers, and families used daily. In the months before the explosion, soldiers had already dug up devices buried under gravel, tucked inside drainage ditches, even wired to fence posts. The borderlands between Michoacán and Jalisco had quietly become a danger map. Ask locals, and they'll point to which dirt roads are off-limits after dark, which schools kids can no longer walk to, which fields are abandoned because one wrong truck tire could set off a blast. Soldiers' own logs confirm it. Hundreds of mines pulled from that strip alone, with Michoacán leading the country in IED threats. Just 2 weeks after the Los Reyes blast, the story took another turn.
operating in Somalia fallen victim to numerous IED attacks.
On June 10, 2025, Mexican authorities raided the area and captured 17 suspects. 12 were Colombians. 9 had once worn the uniform of Colombia's army. Investigators said this same group had a hand in the mine attack that killed those 8 troops. Mexico's security chief, Omar Garcia Harfuch, told the press that the Colombians had entered legally, slipping through Mexico City's international airport on tourist visas. Within days, 11 ex-soldiers were ordered held for trial. Bogotá condemned what it called the mercenary pipeline, but reporters dug into how it really worked. Recruits were promised high pay and even given tickets for the trip. Once they landed in Mexico, though, the reality set in. Passports were confiscated, orders were handed down, and they were marched straight into cartel training camps. On the ground, local leaders were sounding alarms. In Uruapan, the mayor warned that Colombians and Venezuelans were openly training cartel gunmen near his city. He begged for federal reinforcements. Police even stumbled on a video showing recruits drilling with rifles and grenades. Journalists from El País later pieced the system together. Ex-Colombian soldiers running 3-month crash courses on explosives, heavy weapons, and infantry tactics. Drones were included in the lessons, too. For many of the foreign recruits, the deal was brutal. The Los Angeles Times spoke with Colombians who answered ads on social media promising $3,000 a month for security work. When they arrived, the pay was closer to $300. Their passports were seized, and they were warned that quitting meant death. One man said he ended up training about 100 young cartel fighters, some not even 18 years old. It wasn't a rumor anymore. Mexico's cartels were now weaponizing foreign military experience.
Powerful Mexican drug cartel has allegedly taken responsibility for the kidnapping of 4 U.S. citizens and killing 2 of them.
While that story unfolded, Guanajuato faced a different kind of horror: the return of car bombs. A few months ago, a sedan exploded outside police headquarters in Acámbaro, wounding 3 officers and blowing apart storefronts.
2 car bombs detonated targeting police stations in central Mexico, and in the south, local police were killed after getting caught.
Just hours later, another car bomb detonated in Jericuaro, torching a patrol truck and damaging nearby buildings. 2 blasts coordinated in one day, both inside the same state. Even for Guanajuato, already Mexico's deadliest state, this was something new. Car bombs had been rare in Mexico, which is why the twin attacks made headlines worldwide. For local police, the real impact was psychological. Every parked car outside their station suddenly looked like a possible weapon. Farther south, near the border with Guatemala, the war spilled into the open. On June 3, 2025, 5 state police officers were driving near Frontera Comalapa in Chiapas when they rolled straight into an ambush. Gunmen turned the road into a trap. By the time it was over, their patrol truck was nothing but a burned-out shell with the officers' bodies inside. The governor's office even released photos of the charred vehicle to show the cost. But this wasn't just one attack. It was part of a larger turf war. The Sinaloa cartel and CJNG were battling over everything from migrant smuggling routes to extortion rackets and stolen fuel lines.
Power as the figurehead of the Sinaloa cartel, thought to be Mexico's and perhaps the world's biggest drug trafficking network.
Civilians got caught in the middle. Families began fleeing across the border into Guatemala, taking their kids and whatever they could carry. By August, Guatemalan officials reported they had granted temporary humanitarian status to 161 Mexicans, 39 families, including 69 children. Mexico's governor tried to play it down, saying the exodus wasn't about organized crime. But reporters saw the truth on the ground. Entire towns emptying as families heard engines roaring and gunshots cracking and decided not to wait for the knock at their door. And this wasn't new. In 2024, when houses were torched in Tila, more than 4,000 residents fled. People leave when staying becomes too costly. Fear didn't always arrive with gunmen. Sometimes it came with a locked door. On June 1st, 2025, a fire ripped through a drug rehabilitation center in San Jose Iturbe, Guanajuato. 12 people died, and at least 3 more were injured. Investigators looked into whether victims had been locked inside. That detail sent a chill across the country. Cartels have attacked rehab centers before, hunting rivals who tried to hide or targeting addicts as fresh recruits. In 2020, 27 people were massacred in a rehab center in Irapuato.
Police in Irapuato, Mexico say the death toll following an attack on a rehabilitation.
In 2010, 19 were gunned down in Chihuahua. Families desperate to help loved ones quit drugs now faced a cruel question. Would the locked door meant to keep them safe instead trap them to die? And then the battlefield shifted to the sky. For years, cartels had modified cheap store-bought drones to drop grenades or small homemade bombs. But in 2025, they escalated. FPV drones, first-person view attack drones, entered the fight. These aren't toys that hover and release. They are fast, goggle-guided aircraft designed to slam directly into a target and explode on impact. In April, analysts confirmed the first FPV strike in Mexico, carried out by CJNG. The difference was dramatic. FPV drones can zip through a doorway, dive under a roofline, or crash into the back of a moving truck. In effect, cartels had turned cheap drones into precision-guided missiles. Defense experts flagged it as one of the most dangerous escalations yet. What the world had already seen in Ukraine and the Middle East was now happening in Mexico's streets. Analysts at CSYS and War on the Rocks warned that recruits were lifting those tactics straight from foreign war zones using Telegram videos, online tutorials, and downloadable flight settings to copy what they saw. And by 2025, they were applying those lessons in real time. By the middle of summer, it was clear cartels weren't just buying drones anymore. They were building entire drone squads and even shopping for counter-drone gear to knock police aircraft out of the sky. Industry reports said some of those jammers on the black market cost 6 figures. But for cartels, that was pocket change, as long as a smuggling route stayed profitable. Mexico's own numbers showed how quickly the drone war was spreading. In 2020, there were only a handful of drone attacks. By 2023, the count had exploded to 260, with most of them in Michoacán. Farmers and soldiers didn't need official tallies. They could already see the buzzing machines overhead. Police tried to respond. In June 2025, state officers in Chiapas unveiled drones of their own, armed and ready. One photo showed a multi-rotor carrying a rifle slung beneath it. It was a shocking sign of how far the arms race had gone. Cops in one of Mexico's poorest states were now experimenting with airborne weapons just to keep up. Whether those police drones will ever be used under clear rules is another question. What mattered was simple. The game had changed. From mines on farm roads to drones screaming from the sky, the cartel's response left no doubt. They weren't just gangs anymore. The U.S. called them terrorists.
Savage drug cartels as far as foreign terrorist organizations, along with 2 bloodthirsty.
And in Mexico's streets, they proved why. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.